black like me. Black like me. Black like me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, good people. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. And so I am so glad to be able to bring this interesting conversation with you today with my colleague and my friend Jack Salzwedel, who is the president and CEO of American Family Insurance. Let me just tell you a little bit about AmFam Insurance. It's been around since 1927. And so if my math is correct, that's about 93 years. Its mission is to inspire, protect, and restore dreams through their insurance products, exceptional service, and their agency owners and employees, community investment, and creative partnerships to address societal changes. AmFam acts on its belief in diversity and inclusion by constantly evolving to meet customer needs and preferences. American Family Insurance Group is the nation's 13th largest property and casualty insurance group, ranking around 254th on the Fortune 500 list. You know, sometimes those things move, but at the time of my research, that's what it said. And across the company, the group has more than 13,500 employees nationwide. A couple things that I've noticed on their website that have been of particular interest to me. There's a section that says celebrating what makes you part of us. Your statements, and this is what's said by the leadership of AmFam to its staff, your ideas, your background, and your experiences make a difference. They're vital to our company's success. We deliver diversified and innovative insurance solutions by keeping up with our ever-changing demands of customers. We understand that we can only do this with a diverse workforce. And so I'm struck by that. So I'm really interested in having a conversation with a local CEO who's running a Fortune 300 company thereabouts, and just talk about how the issues of today in terms of race, diversity, and inclusion are having an impact on corporate culture and how corporate culture is having influence on society. And you're in for a treat today. We're going to sit back and just have a discussion. Jack has all these accolades, but in another life years ago, he and I served on a high school board together, the local Catholic high school, and that's where we first met each other. So, Jack, welcome to Black Like Me podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to our discussion today. There's so many things, Jack, that you and American Family Insurance. Or is it disrespectful if I say AmFam? Is that okay?
No, that's great. That's a great term. Yep.
Okay, all right, because it's catchy and it's easy to remember. So I just want to make sure I'm not being disrespectful in saying that. But we're going to get into some discussions a little bit about who you are, where you grew up, your experience with the company, and some things that I think will be of importance to folks. But Jack, there's something that I do at every interview, and I ask what's called Black Ice Breakers, and just a series of questions that we ask folks. Now, the majority of my guests are African American or they're Black. And so, but because we are an equal opportunity podcast, we have to ask the same questions to everyone. So Jack, you lose no points if you don't get these, but I guarantee you will have very interesting conversations with your African American friends and colleagues after this. So growing up, grits or cream of wheat? Did you have a preference for either of those as a breakfast here?
Oatmeal.
Oatmeal. It's interesting.
My oatmeal, my mom used to laugh about it because it's supposed to be really healthy for you. And I used to pile on sugar, brown sugar, butter, cream, and everything I could to make it unhealthy. So,
well, Jack, if you're going to do all of that, you might as well eat grits because that's about what I put on my grits. And so,
right.
Have you ever had grits?
Yes, I sure have. Yeah.
Some people do it for dinner, but I would, the way my grandmother would fix them is I'd put the same stuff you put in your oatmeal. So people have been asking, come on, G, you got to add oatmeal. So recently people have told me to add oatmeal and multi-meal to that list.
I got to say that from a grit standpoint, a nice dose of cheese on the top usually helps that, right?
All right. Ding, 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 ding. Okay, you just got some cool points with that one, Jack. You just, particularly our Southern listeners, they're going to enjoy that. Jack, what's the longest period of time you've ever waited in a barbershop for a haircut?
Oh, probably a half an hour.
Yeah, ask some of your black buddies about that. As a kid, man, that was a half-day ordeal. We had to pack a lunch when we were going to the barbershop because you
Okay,
had to wait for the right
I'm
barber.
learning something here then. I didn't know that. That's
Oh,
interesting. Okay.
oh man, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Your friends are gonna think, yeah, that's you got a real good, man. You got a real good. Growing up, did you have relatives who put plastic over furniture, particularly like sofas?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so you got something in common. Tell me about it. Was it a grandparent or an aunt?
I had a grandmother. And she had plastic over chairs and sofas, and I thought it was really weird, but
I did too. I had an uncle and aunt who did that. Did that aunt also have like plastic runners that went like across the room so you wouldn't walk on the light colored carpet?
no, it didn't have the plastic runners, just some
Got
plastic on the furniture.
I can relate to that. Okay, you'll be able to relate to a lot of black staff about that. Hey, do you know any uses for cocoa butter?
No, I don't.
That's a staple in a lot of black homes growing up. You can use it for stretch marks, you can use it for scars, but it's a lot of times it's used in face cream, but like in Walgreens, it comes in a stick, almost like a push-up, like the ice cream treat, but you rub it over scars, and so it's like a mainstay if you've got a scar that won't go away. Are you familiar with the term splitting the pole? Like when I was growing up, we were told, "Hey, don't split the pole while walking down the street."
No,
Okay,
no.
no problem. That's like if there's a post office box, like when you used to have those big neighborhood mailboxes or street light, you weren't allowed to split it. Like you had to all go around the left or the right of it because it was somehow considered a bad thing. Man, Jack, you're doing well. Just a couple of others. I love these because they're just fun to think about some of these cultural pieces. In a lot of black homes in the 60s, Jack, there was a 3-picture shrine-like arrangement on so many tables and mantelpieces. And so I can remember going to relatives' houses, and there would be these 3 photos on like so many of the homes of relatives. And I didn't know if it was just a Chicago thing or if other families did it. And I could tell you one of them. And let me see if you can think of who the other 2 might be. One of them was MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. Any idea who the other 2 were?
Well, probably Malcolm X would be my guess for one, maybe.
You would think that. And I didn't see that one as much, but you would think that would be it. But it's interesting. It would be Martin Luther King Jr., JFK, and a picture of Jesus. I can't tell you how many black homes I would go to, and those 3 would be like on mantelpieces. And it's funny to me that when I talk to black guests, whether we're from the East Coast, West Coast, or South, how many of us saw some of that or had some of those experiences?
Okay.
Oh man. All right, Jack, this is okay. Let me just think. Can you name any of the kids from the 1970s Good Time series?
Well, that was Kid Dynamite, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, okay, that's okay. All right. Ding, ding, ding. You got that one.
Dynamite.
That's right. That was JJ Evans. You got that. Jimmy Walker.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Jack. Thanks for that, because that just gives us a chance to break the ice and laugh a bit about some of those things. Because what's really funny is shows the strength of culture. But like you and I can both relate to furniture being covered in plastic. But my daughter Lexi is 24, clearly African American, has no understanding of what that is. So it also shows that some of these cultural norms are not just connected to our ethnicity. It's just maybe the era we grew up in. But that's just fun to have a talk about some of those.
Yeah.
Some of those things. So Jack, you're a Wisconsin. Please go ahead. What were you gonna ask me?
Split the pole. That's a new one to me.
Yeah. You know what? Yes, definitely. And it's splitting the pole. It's again, the younger generation doesn't know that. Another thing I was going to ask if we had more time, but it's this thing about dreaming about fish. Like in Black community and culture, if someone says, "I dreamed about fish," I dreamed I was fishing last night, people will start laughing because, like in a lot of Black homes and families, that meant someone was pregnant. So if I said, "Oh, I dreamed about fish," people would be like, "Don't, no, I got fixed. Don't look at me. Don't look over here. That's going to be a true miracle." So it's just funny how some of those things have evolved. And I think, Jack, what that really does is it ties into why diversity is really important, because culture and understanding of culture can really hold a group tightly. And it was those kinds of stories or things that at least in African American community that we laughed at, that allowed us to be resilient or feel like we're part of something great, or we bonded together and we weathered storms. When we accept people, when we have an inclusive work environment, we're able to bring those strengths, those beliefs, that sense of really connecting and being a part of the larger team. We bring that to work too as well. So when companies and organizations and schools, universities really embrace diversity, it's not just saying we're going to tolerate people who are different. It's also receiving a lot of the cultural strengths that have made them such strong and beautiful people. And I'm sure you know that, which is why you're such an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So Jack, you're a Wisconsinite. You grew up in DeForest, right? Or near DeForest?
Yeah, I grew up, I was born in Madison at Madison General Hospital, the old Meritor back in the day.
I remember.
Yeah, and then my dad started an American Family agency in DeForest, Wisconsin, which is, as you know, a little town about 25 miles north of Madison. And so we moved the family in 1965 when I was 5 years old. We moved up to DeForest. He started his agency. Originally, it was in our home. So we had people coming through the house. You know, he was trying to sell insurance to them, and I'd have to keep my toys picked up because they're walking through the living room and whatnot. And I mean, there were a lot of times he'd go out to try and sell or service insurance, and I'd just want to be next to him. So I'd drive in the car and I'd wait in the car while he was inside selling insurance. Mm-hmm. Hopefully it was a quick sale and he was back in the car. So once in a while it was longer and I'm just sitting there in the cold car. But yeah, so grew up DeForest, graduated from DeForest High School, then went on to college in Iowa and had a little break and went to Kansas City for a year, worked for the Federal Reserve Bank, but then came back to American Family and started in a base level claims job in our health claims area, and then just kind of started moving around from there. So, wow. Yeah.
Did your dad live long enough to see you come back to American Family and move around a bit? Did he get to see?
Yeah, he didn't. So he didn't see me become president, but he saw me become an officer with the company, and that was a great source of pride for him. So,
it had to have been. Yeah. Speaking of being an officer, just tell me a little bit about when you came into executive leadership. Just tell me about the timing or the scheduling of that.
Yeah. So, and this kind of gets to, I guess, my awareness in the field of diversity,
sure.
Equity, inclusion, justice, things like that. I was an agent in the Madison area for a while, and was offered a management position down in the Milwaukee area. And this was in the late 80s. And I took the job as a district manager, and I found out right after I took the job that American Family had been, that there was a lawsuit that had been filed against us for racial redlining.
I remember that lawsuit.
Yep. And so, I'd grown up in the company and I had been around leaders of the company. My dad was a good agent. And so, I figured there's nothing to this lawsuit. I knew people, and I knew there was nobody who would do that type of stuff. And so I went down to Milwaukee, and, I worked in Milwaukee for 7 years. And then in 2005, there was a settlement of the lawsuit. The lawsuit was brought against American Family by the government, the federal government. Janet Reno was Attorney General at that time. It was also brought against us by a couple of large organizations, NAACP, ACLU, and then there were some private plaintiffs in Milwaukee. If you remember Marvin Pratt, he became mayor at one point. Mm-hmm. Marvin was a private plaintiff. James Hall, a number of other, Bill Lynch. These were all kind of Felmers Chaney, who was head of the NAACP in Milwaukee. They were private plaintiffs. So they brought this lawsuit. We settled the lawsuit in 2005. And right at that same time, the guy who was kind of running the management group in Milwaukee, the sales management group, retired, and I was brought in to as the new sales director. So one of the first things, I think Janet Reno, I think we signed it in June 15th of 1995, and I think I became effective as the sales director June 1st. So, yeah. So my first entry into this was a consent decree that American Family had signed, and it was a 5-year decree. And so my job was to live to the letter of the law of the consent decree that we signed with the government, with these NAACP, ACLU, and then these private plaintiffs. So, my first foray into what this is all about was at that time, 1995 to 2000. And what ended up happening, you say, how did I become an officer? Well, I had worked on that consent decree and had gotten some advocates in the city of Milwaukee, some of the folks who were on the other side of the table, when we started all of this, became advocates of mine and friends. And there was a gentleman by the name of Darnell Moore. He's our first African-American executive vice president with American Family, who I really didn't know.
Friend of mine.
Do you know Darnell?
Yeah, his wife used to be my assistant.
Loretta?
Yes.
Lovely.
They're part of our church. I was their pastor for years until they moved.
Just wonderful. I still correspond with them a lot. And anyway, Darnell was our first executive vice president. And I think maybe some folks had whispered in his ear about me or whatever. And when he had a position open up, he considered me and hired me. And and so that was so Darnell was a huge mentor then for me as I became an officer, learning the ropes of how to be an officer in a Fortune 500 company. And so Darnell has been a good friend and a mentor of mine for many, many years. And then Darnell retired, and I just kind of was chosen to become president and CEO and chair. So that's kind of the background. So I really owe the work of the consent decree, the redlining lawsuit. All of that background was instrumental in me really rising up in the organization. And when I came out of that, I said to my wife and a number of people, it was one of those, if I ever get to run this company, I'm going to. And one of the things I said was, I'm not going to forget my experience in Milwaukee, and that's going to become a central tenet of who we are as an organization. And I've tried to hold true to that. So that's a very long answer to your question.
Jack, that's a great answer. When Dr. King was brought in to the civil rights movement, it wasn't really because he had helped to shape it. They just thought, he was a good spokesperson, and he's young, he could probably take a hit and, sort of stay in his lane. And he really grew into those shoes. But he was really somewhat of an unlikely candidate. And it sounds like that might have been your story too. But I'm curious, because you said when you started thinking about the consent decree, did I get that name right? Yeah, consent decree.
Yep.
You thought, I know, folks, we wouldn't do that. So do you think you were brought in to squash it because it was a bunch of hogwash and nonsense? Or do you think you were brought in because they thought, this is messy and we think this guy can probably mediate and help us to build some unity? What do you think was sort of the general sense in bringing you into all of that chaos?
I think it was probably the latter. I think when, as the discovery happened, we got sued in 1988. We signed the decree in 95. So that 7-year period, I think there was a lot of discovery that happened, questions that were asked. And I think it was a time where the company started realizing that there's some undercurrent things going on here that maybe we're not aware of, that we may as an organization not say we're for one thing, but we have individuals on the boots on the ground who are behaving a different way. And I think that the company saw that, started seeing that. And what I've said is I came into this thinking there was, our side of the table and the other side of the table, and that I had heard that there was very contentious negotiations and there were troubles with different parties and whatnot. American Family didn't feel that they were being treated fairly. And, what I realized when I got into this very quickly, that there wasn't different sides of the table, that the table was round, and that we were really here for the same thing. American Family was trying to have livelihoods for agents. We were trying to grow revenue. We wanted our policy base to increase, and we wanted to do it at a profit. And the community that we were serving, that was not being served right or correctly, was looking for affordability. They were looking for product that matched their risk. They were looking for availability. And so, we had the same goals. We just had to figure out how to build product, how to build pricing, how to develop agencies in communities where we hadn't been represented. And it became very quickly obvious to me that we're on the same side of the table, and how do we solve this? And that's why people like Marvin Pratt and these individuals, Felmers Chaney, they were very helpful for me in identifying, who are leaders in the African-American community that could help us recruit agents in the communities. What type of products were needed that were unique to a certain culture that we didn't necessarily know about. And so we worked really hard to try and do that. And we tested ourselves. We had paired testing where they'd have somebody who would call an agency with a home location in the core of the city with the exact same attributes as somebody in the suburbs, and they'd see if people were steering them differently. And so we had some cleanup to do in terms of agencies that were not doing things right, but we created consistency, tried to create consistency around some of these processes as well. So
what's interesting to me is AmFam went from understanding and actually accepting culpability of some of the practices, redlining practices, whatever you want to call it, practices in the Milwaukee area. But somehow you stayed focused on that, but someone started asking the question, obviously, well, how do people of color inside our organization feel? We know how many Milwaukee residents who are not our employees, they are our potential or would-be customers, but we got people who look like them working inside our office. Have we created barriers unnecessarily for some of those folks inside our company? Tell me about the process of moving from not just looking at how do you clean up the mistakes in Milwaukee, but also looking internally at how do you clean up anything that you may be doing inside that's impeding the growth and the attraction and retention of people of color. How did it become a value inside the organization, and not just who you sell to, but who you hire, who you promote, who you retain?
Yeah, I think, that's a work in progress. And I'll tell you that a couple of the most impactful meetings that I've ever had in my history with the company, I've been with the company now since 1983, happened this year. And they happened after the murder of George Floyd. And they were a couple of meetings that we pulled with our African-American leaders specifically. And some people have said to me, oh, do you really think it's as bad as you see on TV, all the race stuff going on and the stuff with that? I had somebody last week say that to me. And, you sit in a meeting room with a group of leaders that you have total trust in, and you hear the stories of how they've dealt with, the talk with their kids, with their sons on police and the experiences that they've had. And it's not 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's
not
2 weeks ago. And every single person has a story and has stories, and they all align. And again, we stepped back from that meeting and we thought, man, do we still have a huge amount of work to do as an organization, obviously as a country, but as an organization, in terms of creating acceptance around people who have experiences that are different. We do this training, we do diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice training, but people come into that training at a totally different spot. I'm a 60-year-old white male. I come in very different than a 25-year-old Hispanic person that we just hired.
Mhm.
And we expect when we get done with this training that we're all on the same page. We're all still very different. We haven't really moved to the same page at all. And so it's, I would say to you that we started diversity inclusion training in the early 90s as an organization as a result of the consent decree.
Okay.
And it's been ongoing since that time. And if anything good can happen from a lawsuit, I think about this a lot.
Sure.
That lawsuit was so good for American Family because it shone a very bright light on some issues, and it started us down a path that we're still on today and continuing on, and a really important path for us, I think.
That's I love the fact that you described it, Jack, as a pivot, or I mean, you might not use that word exactly, but
Yeah.
it also caused a pivot. It caused you to look differently and internally at your structures and how you function as a company. It makes me realize if corporations, universities, certain branches of law enforcement, if we took very painful and unfortunate and deadly moments, like many of which we saw this year, if we would just turn and pivot on those things rather than trying to justify where we are, we could become better and stronger as a nation. I really believe that.
Yeah, I do too. And I think, when we first started the decree, it was really hard work. I mean, it was a mind shift for a lot of people. And it wasn't natural at all. It was very unnatural.
So, Jackson, for folks who don't understand, like the decree basically, as I did a little bit of research on it, it basically said that American Family Insurance had to be very targeted in selling and marketing its products and coverage to the African American community. So it wasn't just a slap on the wrist, and I'm sorry, it wasn't just paying Black people hush money and a gag order. You had to change your business.
Yeah.
In Milwaukee. I mean, is that correct? For folks who don't know what a consent decree is, you had to really change your business and market to the very people who were suing you for having not marketed to them.
Yeah, it included a monetary payment that went to organizations that are trying to address some of this systemic bias and racism, but it also included you'll open a certain amount of offices. You'll hire a certain amount of people. There were parts of it that were kind of a quota system. There were product, we would design product and we would look at pricing differently. The use of credit scoring, and how we did that was included in it. So there were a lot of different, there was a lot of different aspects to it. And like I said, initially it was very foreign. It was very hard, but it's like anything else. I remember someone telling me one time, if you're feeling really bad, just start to, force yourself to feel good. It'll feel very unnatural when you start doing it, but after a while, it'll become used to it and you'll get out of your funk a lot quicker. And it was kind of like that. It was very difficult to do this to start, but then it started to become just a little more natural, a little more easy. And then it starts to become a part of your culture. And but I'd say even as we got into the 2000s, we complied with the consent decree. We moved past it. It's been a long journey. It's been a slow journey, and I would say, part of my tenure as chair and CEO has been to really push things a lot more intentionally. We took our board down to Montgomery, Alabama last year to see the lynching museum and to see the
Brian Stevenson's work.
Yep, and to see the museum for peace and justice with the coffins that are hanging.
Sure.
And we've got a relationship with that group, with EJI, and part of that board experience was to open their eyes to what's really going on. And this was before, the pandemic and George Floyd and things like that. So it was kind of on the front end of that. But to see our board members, who are all leaders in and of themselves, open up to what we were seeing and to understand what our what our employees and our workforce and our customer base is working through. You think about what's going on from a justice standpoint and our criminal justice situation, and our view is those are potential workers, they're potential customers, and so
Taxpayers?
yeah, taxpayers, the whole thing. But at a real visceral level, there are neighbors, there are workforce, and so anything we can do to try to support reform to make that more equitable is just good for business. So we've talked about how we drive these initiatives through our strategy, so that they're not a moment in time, but a movement. And I've learned this from people like Talisa Yancey, who Michael Riggs,
Sure.
Many of the people of color who have become leaders, who have helped me and changed me as an individual, as a leader. And it's just it makes so much sense from a strategy, from a profit and loss standpoint, that this become a movement. And I think we're seeing that as a company. We're seeing success with this, partly because unfortunately, we're kind of unique.
Sure. I'm thinking about the trajectory of the shift for AmFam from this unfortunate situation in Milwaukee, and not unfortunate for AmFam, but unfortunate for the people who are trying to secure their dreams and found it difficult to do so. At some place in the process, I'm sure that people begrudged that process. But at some point, as you said, forcing yourself to be happy when it's a difficult time, people pressed in and realized, you know what, this is right, this is good, this is good. As an African American, that's all I want branches of the government, universities, other big businesses to do. You can't undo the whole past. But if there's just a sense of culpability, what if we have been doing this wrong, inappropriate? Someone knew it was inappropriate. That doesn't mean the CEO knew. Someone knew that we're not going to insure here. We're not going to cover this out. Somebody knew that wrong was going on. But you made a shift to then be intentional about marketing towards this community. I think if we did this locally in Madison and Wisconsin and the country, if people just said, you know what, maybe we didn't try to, maybe we didn't mean to, but we haven't been treating everyone fairly. So let's get a strategy of how we market, how we hire, how we promote, how we welcome. Again, I just keep thinking it's that simple. What you feel and believe, AmFam feels and believes, that this is a part of how your company keeps its cutting edge. This is what makes you unique. I was on I was part of a training a few weeks ago with you, and you said it's key to your sustainability. What do businesses, entities, branches of law enforcement, what do you think they feel they're going to lose if they don't do this? Because you feel that it's a win-win, but some tend to think that it'll be a real loss for them. Do you understand, or can you help me understand why they might think that?
Yeah, I think they're first off, people have not made the connection, the really strong business connection between diversity, inclusion, justice, equity, and their strategy and their bottom line, profit and loss.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is key. And we've done, and it's hard work to figure that out. I mean, there's non-proprietary studies and data out there. I think McKinsey's got a study. I think Hewitt has a study where they look at the effectiveness and engagement of teams, and teams that are diverse in thought, in racial makeup, in gender. These teams, they typically take longer to gel. It takes longer for them to form, storm, norm, all that type of stuff. But once because they're coming from different spots. So a group of all white folks or all black folks, they're gonna get together and get to a common thought quicker. But over time, they're not going to be as innovative. They're not going to be as effective or engaged as a group that's more diverse. And so it takes a little bit longer for that to happen. But then on the back end, you see more productivity, you see more engagement, and that's where your bottom line, more innovation. That's where your bottom line really. So it's that link up front. it's that investment, that initial investment that you probably need to carry long on your resources. So you got to carry some extra people. It's going to take a little bit longer for these groups to form. So it's going to cost a little bit more for a longer period of time.
Right.
But once they do, the effectiveness is so much greater. It's that piece of it, I think, where people have not been able to rationalize and make that connection. I think that's one piece of it. I also think for leadership groups who have not gone down this path and really wrestled with this, there's a fear. There's a fear.
Tell me about that. Yes.
Of doing something wrong and being culpable for something that they didn't intend to do, but because of their lack of knowledge and trying to muddle through figuring out how to start this,
right?
It's easier. I shouldn't say easier, but it's safer to not go there. And it's really too bad. I hear this, you and I had a conversation about some of the folks that have looked at some of the work that others have done and have called it the ultimate of white privilege, that white folks are coming in and trying to solve these problems. And it's so harmful for those types of messages to come out, because it's really what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a safe zone for leaders,
right,
to experience, learn, screw up, and move forward with this type of work. And so creating these safe zones where people can do that and without fear. You can say what you think, and I might disagree, but we're going to talk about it.
Right.
And we're going to move ourselves forward as a leadership group or a team or whatever. And that's the type of safety that I think. So it's this profit and loss piece. It's this tie with effectiveness and the bottom line. But then it's also the safety for leaders to get out there and to experience what it's like to wrestle with really hard things. And discuss them. And I think it's those two things that are really, really holding back a lot of companies in terms of really driving into this work.
That's insightful. I'm sure a lot of managers and CEOs who are listening to this are going to be helped by that.
Hi, this is Dan Groupie from Monona, Wisconsin. I listen to Black Like Me because it brings alive for me what it means to be a Black person living in Wisconsin and living in the United States through people's stories and lived experiences. And this show has helped me to understand my role as a white person in either allowing racial disparities and injustices to be perpetuated or to take a more active role in dismantling these systems. And I'm a Patreon supporter because I feel like it's critical to amplify this message and help bring more people to the fight.
Now, in its 5th season, the award-winning Black Like Me podcast has a reach throughout the U.S. in over 100 countries around the world. It is the work of a dedicated team of people here in Madison, Wisconsin, dedicated to changing the conversation surrounding race. When you sign up to support Black Like Me as a patron, you support the work that they are doing and help create better quality content and a better society. By going to patreon.com/blacklikeme and signing up at any of the levels offered, you are not only signing up to make a monthly donation, you are also joining a growing community of people interested in engaging the issue of race with a raw, unprecedented honesty. As a patron of the podcast, you will have access to exclusive content like extended interviews, bonus rants, and video chats with Dr. G. You will also have a chance to join the conversation that other patrons are already having with Dr. G about race in America. To become a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/blacklikeme or see the link in our show notes. And for as little as $2, you can support these important conversations and the work that Dr. G is doing. Thank you in advance.
I often hear this question, Jack, that sometimes there are great proponents of diversity, equity, and inclusion at work, but it doesn't necessarily leave the office and follow that individual into the convictions about how they live their lives and their relationships. How has your work or this aha about the importance of diversity and inclusion at AmFam followed you home? Like, how does it help you to think about these things when you're not at work, when you're not the CEO, when you're dad, uncle, grandpa, neighbor? Are you finding that these ahas about the importance of inclusion become a part of your non-work life when you're at home as well?
Yeah, they are for me, for sure. I have these discussions with Sarah,
Mm-hmm.
deeply personal about my upbringing. There was, there was a time in my life, early on when I had my kindergarten picture, I think I shared with you, where I have a bunch of little white girls in dresses and a bunch of little white boys in sweaters and
And bow ties.
bow ties and one African American boy. And there was a time when I kind of lost my way, I'd say high school, where I should have been a stronger advocate for certain things. And so, this type of work has pushed me at work, and it's pushed me personally then to explore some of these things and talk to the people that I love about them. My kids are deeply involved in this whole discussion around
So important.
reading things like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Brian Stevenson, obviously, but talking about this as a family. And I think that my daughter adopted a little baby in April. One of the great things to come out of COVID, and it ended up being a little African American girl, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just been a perfect thing for us as a family.
Brings it close to home, doesn't it, Jack?
It does. And Bill Westrate, our president, has talked about he's married to a woman who is from the Asian from the Philippines, and they have a couple of biracial kids. And he said, the fact that I'm a white male and people put me in this bucket of being a white male, he says they don't understand that I have a wife who's a different race. I have biracial kids. I have a granddaughter who's African American. I have people close to me who are LGBTQ. And so this idea that long term it's going to continue to just be this slog, I actually think with George Floyd, with what's happening, this momentum, we have a greater opportunity. And because there's so much of this mix happening now, that looking at me as a straight 60-year-old white male is not the way to look at me, because I have a granddaughter who's African American, and I have I have a daughter who's a business owner. So the gender fairness is a very big thing for me, and LGBTQ and people with disabilities, veterans. This is what makes us great as a country. And I think, with our political system the way it is right now, the business community has to step up. And that's where our opportunity is.
Yes.
It really is. It's the opportunity is in the business community to recognize the value of this to the bottom line, and to embrace it and to go there. And I'm seeing it more and more. You're seeing the chamber in Madison who's taking an active view in this work right now. Data collection, trying to push data collection to say, how many folks in your organization at a leadership level are African American? How many are Hispanic? How many executives are? And so chambers are talking about, the Milwaukee Chamber's talking about it. Our industry, the American Property and Casualty Insurance Association, has a group that Talisa's chairing right now, Talisa Yancey, who's our chief operating officer. And they're knee deep in this. So I really think that there is a movement going on in the business community that's going to be really healthy, and that will kind of push against all the political issues that we've got right now.
Sure. Yeah, I love that you're emphasizing the importance of the business community just to shift and change, because I couldn't agree more. You know, Jack, in our community, when something happens like George Floyd's killing, the media jumped all over Black influencers. We were in TV stations like this, radio stations, asking us questions and then saying, well, we hope you feel better that we've given you space to talk about it. And I said this on the air. I said, no, actually I don't, because I have to regurgitate all of this, and it makes it even more real. And what would make me feel better is if my white counterparts who were business leaders were asked, how do they feel about being asleep at the wheel? As the African American community has said, we really haven't progressed since from the 60s as we thought. We've been saying these things. I'd feel better if you asked white leaders, how did they feel about seeing George Floyd die, be killed by a white man? Because I can't answer it any more than I was horrified. It made me sick. I have nightmares over it. And this, I'm just, why do you think white leaders, white business leaders, get off the hook with media outlets when egregious acts like that happen, and only Black folks are asked how we feel about it, but business leaders aren't necessarily paraded on television or in front of the media to explain, how does it feel to know that these kinds of things are happening in your community and your Black friends knew that they could happen, and it wasn't a strong sense that that could happen in our community? It just seems like it's an unfair treatment, but sorry, that's a long question. But I just, your insights as to how it is that we have to always address how we feel when Amy Cooper was called the police on a Black man, but I didn't see a panel of white women being asked, how do you feel seeing a white woman weaponize the police this way? So what are your thoughts about how white business leaders get off in a community like ours when these racial incidents happen and there's no sort of accountability or at least question about how does this impact you and what's your role in making a difference? Any thoughts about that?
Interesting question. I mean, one thing I can tell you is no media outlet ever came my way when this stuff happened, right?
And I told them to.
Right.
We don't know who the white leaders are. They actually said, we don't know who identifies as white leaders or who the white population follows. They literally said that to me, and I dropped names to them. I didn't mean to cut you off, but yes. So you said no media outlets called you to say, how did you feel about, as a white male, how did you feel about seeing a white male killing a Black male? No one asked you that in the media, Jack?
No, not once. And Ahmaud Arbery, you can go down the list, right?
Exactly.
Of incidents that have happened. And I mean, I don't know, is that you look at the media and you look at the people who are asking the questions, and
Right.
and many of those are not people of color. So
Right.
they're going to run to, where they're feeling comfortable with things, which is probably, if it's an issue that happened to an African American person, going there. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's a tough question.
Because I think that if we as African American influencers, and it's interesting because the media anyone who wants to get on a microphone is called a Black leader. I can remember like watching TV with colleagues and we're saying, who is that person? We don't know them. How did they get to be a leader? But they rarely say, a white alder can make a statement and they won't say, a leader in the white community said. I've never heard media refer to you as a white leader. You have 13,000 employees. You're a Fortune 300 company. If I had a congregation of 10 people, and if I called the media, they would call me a Black leader if they wanted to get my voice on the media. So I guess what I want to say, and as we begin winding down, is what's helpful to me as a Black influencer is knowing that my white colleagues are in this with me. And when we're the only ones on television saying, how do we feel and what are we going to do if we're going to march, if we're going to have a peaceful protest, we're always asked that. And we don't know that our non-Black business allies or fellow leaders stand with us. So as I've gotten to know you better and your executive staff, our organization is fortunate to have been in a working relationship and a partnership with AmFam for a number of years. listening to speeches, being invited in to be part of huddles and enterprise meetings, and I'm hearing things that as an outsider I didn't know. It helps me, Jack. And I know you're not perfect. I know AmFam's not perfect, but hearing you say businesses must step up, and for me, that's code of white leaders. We need to be a part of the solution. We need to listen. We need to put our money where our mouth is. Those things are really important to me, and I need to know those things because I don't necessarily. It can't be assumed that I know that, and I didn't, and so I have to live with tragedies that happen around the country. But what makes it very difficult to live it out here is when I'm constantly asked ad nauseum what I think, what I feel, and I'm not on a panel with my white colleagues and being asked, how will you all work together to bring about solutions? Or having those white colleagues ask, what do you need to be better positioned to bring solutions? And so I'm hoping that the work that you're doing, been doing, these bits of wisdom that you're dropping will help business leaders and influencers begin to think that they've got to be part of the solution. And it can't just be knee-jerk reaction. There's got to be some systemic change. Like if I were to recap our conversation today, here are the things that are takeaways for me, Jack. One, because I know you and your story about your kindergarten picture. Actually, you and I swapped kindergarten pictures because there's just one white kid in my picture in Chicago, and there's like 35 black kids.
Right.
One black kid, and he's on the front row, and then a room full of white kids. And I know you and I have talked about some of the things you witnessed that happened to him. So really from an early age, you've had an awareness of mistreatment and bullying, whether it was because of race or other things. It was because of race in that situation, and some disability issues or ability issues.
Right.
If I were to just reflect on what you're saying, is that there's a part of us that even as kids know certain things are wrong. So let's stop pretending like we don't know that this is really happening. In kindergarten, you knew, I think you told me, is this little young guy's name Herbie? Was it Herbie in your kindergarten?
Yep. Right. Yep.
Come on, you were 6. You knew that was wrong. Don't tell me that you're 50 and running, a $20 million company and you don't know that this is wrong or why your staff is so homogenous. The other thing I heard is you didn't wait until you're the CEO to start rolling up your sleeves. When you directed that dissent consent decree, you weren't the CEO. You weren't in the executive offices. You helped to bring change where you were. Because people might look at you now and say, well, you're the CEO and you got this big multi-billion-dollar, who wouldn't do it? This started back in the 80s and the 90s and permeated the culture and the values. So I'm also hearing that you're telling people start where you can. Don't wait until you're a Fortune, whatever company. Start where you can. I'm also hearing you say, this is helping you live your life more fully because you're retiring soon, but the work's not over, because as much as you have stood up for the African-American, LGBTQ, Asian American, Hispanic populations, folks with physical limitations, disabilities, as you stood up for them, you're going to have to stand up for your granddaughter because this world is changing, but certainly not fast enough.
Right.
And what you have pushed as a cultural value will be something that you'll have to live out as you witness a world that hasn't made the kinds of changes that you led corporately inside AmFam. And you're going to see it up close as your granddaughter interacts with society and society interacts with her. So I'm hearing you say, if you dive into this at work, you may never know what your family's going to look like. And if you take it seriously and you're truly transformed, it's going to position you to be a better grandpa. And a grandpa who can stand in solidarity with his granddaughter, and a grandpa that can tell society, you better step off and leave my granddaughter alone. That you can do more than just say, it's that way sometimes, honey. You can also say to society, it's not going to be that way for her, not without some say-so. And so I just sort of in recapping, man, I've been hearing some real powerful insights that you're sharing with us. And I guess I'll just ask you 2 more questions as we wrap up. What would you say to a CEO or middle management person who's listening, middle management? Maybe they're in the C-suite. That's not middle management, but let's just say it's a small company. They're like in a director level. What do I do? What do I say? It's not on my CEO's radar. Like, what can I have them read, or what conversation can we have? Just off the top of your head, that's one question. Anything that you would say to that manager, to them, what they might say or do to maybe get their company thinking about this?
Yeah, I think the key is really really starting to measure this and really starting to understand how it fits with the marketplace and where you're selling and where you're driving. And so it's this idea that math has no opinion, that you can tell very quickly whether you're making progress in your people balance, because your customers have a balance, and you can tell internally whether you have that. So starting to measure, even if your numbers look terrible, it doesn't matter. Just start to measure this. Start to measure it, and you will then start to see yourself progressing. I mean that, and then the concept of allyship, which is something Talisa has brought to me over the years, and how I can be a better ally for people, how I can clear the path, try to clear the path for people to become successful and to break down some of the organizational barriers that might be there for people.
Yes.
And so the idea of identifying who you can be an ally for, it doesn't have to be 10 people, it doesn't have to be 20 people, it can be one person or two people. And starting small can just lead you personally on this path to really self-exploration and understanding and rewarding process. It really can.
That's phenomenal. I think about one of your former CEOs and presidents and CEOs, Bob Cook, who was a mentor of mine 30 years ago when I started my nonprofit. And he taught me how to put a board together, how to fundraise, how to fundraise cross-culturally. And here I am 30 years later, interviewing his successor on my podcast because he reached out to one or two folks, gave me access to him, and he and Phyllis were my allies. And they blocked for me and they spoke up for me. So I'm proof, Jack, of what happens when key leaders do that. So I want to underscore that. And I said my last question is, what does success look like? Because it's certainly not just numerical. Everyone thinks that, is it when you get the one and when you get a certain amount? I mean, you guys have got a goal for 32% of your total workforce by 2024 being, diverse. And not every company can do that, although I want you to know I admire that and laud it. But for folks who are just trying to figure out in the short run, what does success look like when it's not a quota? Is it a discussion? Is it just, beginning the measurement process? What's an early indicator of success in here? Again, not indicating that you have arrived, but what could you offer up as an early indicator of success?
I mean, I think it's a moving target, right? I mean, that's the thing about this the momentum that we're looking to get, the movement. It's just a real moving target. And so I think if people 20 years ago looked at some of the things that would you have thought 30 years ago that you'd have a Black president?
No.
Oh, right. And so there is positive movement. There is momentum forward. We have a long way to go, but there is some of that move. So this is a moving target in terms of what success really looks like. But I do think it gets to thinking about this less in terms of quotas and more in terms of balance. Mm-hmm. Thinking about how your culture is balanced to be able to provide great results and have inclusivity. Thinking about your numbers of people in your organization. Can you carry it along to get? You're not going to get voices heard unless you have a significant amount of people in some of these areas to be able to feel comfortable with their voice. So numbers is important, but I'd say thinking through balance in your culture, balance in your product, balance in your customer base, and trying to tie that together strategically, I think is probably where we've landed over the last 7 years, and it's been a long road to get there. And if anybody wants landmines, successes, whatever, feel free to reach out, because we're all learning about this. But I'd say that piece of balance and thinking through that as an organization is a great place to start.
That's a great bit of advice. And I'll just say as a closing comment, you're retiring soon. And a few minutes ago, you referred to Bill, AmFam's president, being married to a woman who's Filipino, and they have biracial, multiracial children. he's succeeding you in taking the organization, taking the helm of the organization. So that sends a message, at least to me as a friend of AmFam, that you put in this work and your team has put in this work, but the organization has not chosen a leader that's going to take a huge step back. That this is someone who can promote the values of the organization because he lives it and his family lives it. And having put in all this work, it's really good to know that someone is succeeding you, Jack, who gets it and won't shrink back from it. So kudos to the board and the leadership of American Family in selecting someone who's a proven leader like Bill Westrate, but also someone who has sensitivities to his community, but also to these issues, is a very, very important signal to the business community that you can't put in all this work and then step back. I think that was a fear of even folks inside your organization, inside the community. I mean, like with President Obama, that was a great stride. But part of what we've experienced in the last several years was backlash to that. And so now we're trying to find out how to swing. There was some concern that somebody might step in who would say, all right, now back to business as usual. That was great. Thank you, Jack. But now let's just get back to the business of insurance. And so I just want you to know that part of, although I do a lot of work in diversity, my doctorate degree really focused in on transformational leadership. And so understanding how succession works is very important. So again, if the things you said, done, started, the fact that AmFam is looking at someone like Bill and his qualifications and lived experiences to lead in this next season is, to me, as powerful as a statement as anything I've quoted or read from your website. So kudos to you and the leadership of AmFam for doing something that bold. And already we're seeing, promotions like, chief of staff, I'm watching stuff happening. That's encouraging to me. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation again, not to put you up on a pedestal, but to let people hear that you didn't just walk into this. In kindergarten, you noticed some stuff. And in high school, you walked away from it. And then through what happened in Milwaukee, you were brought back into it. And then that led to your trajectory. And now you're a dad to a woman who's a business owner, who's adopted a daughter who's Black. And it's full circle. It's like you've never gotten away from it. And so these issues are here to stay. So let's lean in. Let's be a part of the solution. And let's just be as good as we can be, because my daughter, my future grandchildren, your granddaughter deserves a better reality than what Black folks and people of color are experiencing right now. And I'm hoping the kinds of things that you do, I do, some of the things that we're fortunate enough to do together will help to create a better world and bequeath a better world to our grandchildren than what we've experienced growing up.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? Make it better. Make it better for the right reasons. So, yeah.
Jack, listen, I know you're busy and have lots of things that you're juggling, but friend, it means a lot to me that you scheduled time, that you came on and took a swing at my Black icebreakers and answered questions. Real honestly, this was a really good conversation, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with our network. So thank you so much for your time. Anything you want to leave us with or leave listeners with before we?
I want to thank you. I want to thank you. Your educational series, I wasn't able to make that last year. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I've heard just great comments, and I know we're trying to figure out a way to package that so we can distribute it to more people.
Yes.
And that has been hugely important for our leadership team in learning and wrestling with this. And so I know there's frustrations for all of us as we go through this, and we all got to just, when we're feeling that, we got to get on the phone and, because this is an important issue. It's an important fight, and we got to just keep it going. So thank you for that. Hey folks, this has been another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. As I tell you, each week, each time we come together, we bring you something that's really insightful that will help you to engage your world and these issues with a greater degree of wisdom. This can't be fixed by one large organization, one small Black-led nonprofit, or a governmental entity. We have to all do our part. So if those of you who are listeners and supporters of Black Like Me, lean into this, listen to this, and understand what conversations you might be able to begin inside your workplace. Your listening and your support is so important to us, and it's helped us to be Wisconsin's favorite podcast in 2020. So I appreciate that and commit myself to continuing to provide excellent interviews, conversations,
dialogues, rants, so that we continue to be worthy of that honor. So thank you so much, and have a great day.
Black like me. Black like.
This has been another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Special shout out to Eli and to Jeremy, who are my engineers and my editors on this, to Don Thornton, who is my podcast manager, who makes sure that we line all of this up, to Corey Saffold, who is responsible for that exciting new jingle, that Black Like Me jingle. I'm so excited about that. And to vocals by Marcus Fleming.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.
Black like me.